Welcome to this webinar on public health and the rule of law, sponsored by the World Federation of Public Health Associations. My name is Alan Herman, MD, PhD, a consultant in epidemiology, public health and healthcare, and former Dean of the National School of Public Health in South Africa. The purpose of this webinar, sponsored by the World Federation of Public Health Associations, is to educate public health professionals, academics, researchers, policymakers in understanding the intersection between public health and the rule of law in order to make the rule of law a tool in improving the health care of populations. The World Federation is a multidisciplinary action sponsor of the World Justice Project. The American Public Health Association, that is also sponsoring this webinar, is also a member of the World Federation and of the World Justice Project. This webinar is made possible through funding from the World Justice Project's Opportunity Grant and from the American Public Health Association. It is an on-demand webinar that is presented free of charge. There are two major objectives of the World Opportunity Fund programs. The first is to strengthen the rule of law in countries around the world through multidisciplinary collaborative action, and the second is to build a worldwide constituency of stakeholders committed to taking action to strengthen the rule of law. The rule of law is important for building and sustaining thriving global communities. As William H. Newcomb, founder of the World Justice Project and past president of the American Bar, has stated, "We are all stakeholders in the rule of law. It gives traction to efforts to address society's gravest ills, including violence, poverty, corruption, sickness, and ignorance." The program today is consistent with the first objective of the World Justice Project and is presented by two lawyers and public health experts. The first presentation gives an overview of the World Justice Project, and the second gives an account of the rule of law within public health. The first presenter is Michelle Forsley. Michelle Forsley is a legal consultant who focuses on how to protect world public health with the rule of law. She works with national governments, NGOs, the World Bank, and the World Health Organization. She's also a law professor at the Widener School of Law in Delaware. She's a graduate of the Johns Hopkins School of Bloomberg School of Public Health and New England Law. More information about Michelle is available on her website. Winifred Carson Smith is founder and chief operating officer of Carson Company, LLC, a health advocacy and consulting organization dedicated to the paradigm of nursing through policy, regulation, and legislation. She is the former senior counsel of the American Nurses Organization, the American Nurses Association. Her clients include think tanks, research organizations, national specialty and state nursing organizations. She's an author and editor, and she publishes nursing law reports, an e-newsletter, and is an expert on insurance, regulatory, and administrative law issues. She serves on a number of boards working with children and is on the editorial advisory board of the American Journal of Nurse Practitioners and Health Law Week. She is an attorney who graduated from Duke University and the National Law Center, George Washington University.
Hello all, and thank you for joining us for this discussion of public health and the rule of law. I also want to thank Dr. Barbara Hatcher, the American Public Health Association, and the World Federation of Public Health Associations for sponsoring this online training and inviting me to present. In the next slide, I'm going to cover the learning objectives for this segment of the program. But right now, I want to take a moment to ask you, can you think of any situations where the law has been an effective and successful tool to prevent disease and protect public health? I can think of a few. Some that come to mind are smoking bans, seatbelt and helmet laws, quarantine laws, and professional licensing requirements. In April 2009, the World Federation of Public Health Associations held its first 2 Rule of Law and Public Health sessions in Istanbul. Participants at that time were asked to discuss what would be topics of interest to them. There were really 2 main areas of interest. First, participants wanted to be able to talk about legal rights and how these were connected to the Millennium Development Goals. They also, second, wanted to know how to orient and train, if necessary, lawyers and the legal community to be more helpful in the realm of public health. Thus, my objectives are 2. First, we will cover definitions, basic concepts of rule of law, and rights in terms of some health topics that are familiar to you, including the Millennium Development Goals. We'll take a look at the dimensions of rule of law that help you look at your country, your community, and your organizations to see where each stands in terms of the overall concepts we'll learn today. Then we'll turn to what is most important. We will look at just how we put rule of law into policy and practice and build bridges with the legal community. Among the legal community, rule of law is a well-established concept. It is a set of 4 universal principles that encompass goals and identify what institutions are needed for the rule of law to be respected, protected, and fulfilled. The World Justice Project frames these principles as they are listed on this slide. So let's take each one. First, the government, its officials and agents are accountable. A simple way to remember this is to say that no one, not even the Minister of Health, is above the law. A second principle is that the laws are clear, publicized, stable, and fair. So some questions you might ask about your country and your community are whether the laws are accessible in paper or electronically. Can you find your laws? Not likely, especially when it comes to health laws. They're hard to find, and they're surely not in digital format. Later, I'll talk with you about a solution to this. You can also ask, does the law protect fundamental rights, such as the right to health, and the security of persons and property? Keep this principle in mind when we look at the Millennium Development Goals. Third, is the process by which laws are enacted, administered, and enforced accessible, fair, and efficient? Ask yourself, can you or does the public health community participate or even have an opportunity to observe how laws are made? Do you have a voice in the laws? Last, are the laws upheld? Is access to justice provided by competent and independent judges and law enforcement officials and attorneys? Are there enough of them to go around, or do they have adequate resources and competencies? Now, the goals and institutions contained in these principles are based in well-accepted notions of justice, equity, fairness, common to all legal and political systems. These principles may not be respected in all places, but none of these are unfamiliar to the common sense of people. In fact, many are embodied in human rights treaties. These principles are not just for the government. Indeed, these are applicable to individual citizens, NGOs, and civil society. Within the public health community, there is growing consensus that a major characteristic of good governance is to operate with due regard to the rule of law. Rule of law is now seen as an implicit dimension of good governance, and work is underway to develop tools to aid public health to make rule of law explicit within governance. I have developed one for you, so that you can make a quick assessment of your community. And if you are interested in a more comprehensive assessment, you can consider the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, and I've created links for you to both of these on my website. Now, let's take a look at the institutions essential to have rule of law. These are courts, law enforcement, officials, lawyers, and the law. First, starting with the courts, everyone should have access to the courts to redress grievances, even against the Minister of Health. Courts are responsible to determine disputes between 2 or more people or the government and a citizen, such as in a criminal case. Courts are well-functioning when, in a case, you get to court in a reasonable period of time, and your case is heard by a judge who is not influenced by outside people. Second, law enforcement is necessary, and it's effective when officers such as police and drug inspectors are given clear guidance on what they are to enforce and how to do it. There must be limits on what they can do and a review process to make sure they do it right. Officers, ministry staff, and all citizens should have an understanding that the officers are rightly empowered to apply the law and that the law is applied rightly. That means they can close a restaurant for a fire hazard or a drug manufacturing facility if it is not complying with good manufacturing practices. Legal professionals are the third institution and are an underutilized resource for public health. The legal community should be encouraged to work with public health and become knowledgeable on what your needs are. It is a two-way street, however. Both communities need to know more about each other for rule of law to be present in your life. Finally, and fourth, a comprehensive body of laws must establish the structure and functions of the government, and that includes all the ministries and the Ministry of Health. Many of you are familiar with the work of the WHO, World Health Organization, on social determinants of health, which has broadened understanding that health is the result of multiple causes. Not only those that are subject to clinical intervention, there are social causes. From the field of legal epidemiology, or the relationship between law and health, we can say that the law is a tool, or we can say that the law acts on determinants of health. There are three branches of law to consider, and they are listed on this slide. Law, first, as a distal tool, or second, a proximal tool, and third, in defining the structure of the government and the health system. As a proximal tool, law utilizes basic legal mechanisms to spend, tax, regulate, such as requiring professionals to take continuing education. Or the law uses damages, equitable relief, or fines, and jail even, to keep people in order. Keep in mind that contracts between individuals and or the government and an individual are also a legal mechanism, and this is the case for procurement contracts. Law is also a distal tool. Law shapes other social conditions that are associated with health outcomes, such as access to water, food, shelter, information, freedom from violence, and the law of human rights is an example of law as a distal tool. Third and finally, the law defines and establishes the structure, functions, and legal mandates of the government and the health system, and most importantly, the Ministry of Health. It creates the infrastructure, processes, and capabilities so the Ministry of Health can perform its main functions. One is stewardship, and there are others, but I want to focus on the function of coordination. And I stress this function because it is essential to whether the rule of law is successfully integrated into public health. There are other ministries that are responsible to enforce the law. In your country, it could be the Ministry of Justice, the police, and law enforcement, or perhaps the military. Too often, public health takes on tough challenges like corruption that should be managed by or with other ministries, and let's not overlook these. Given that a comprehensive body of laws is an institution essential to rule of law, it is important to understand how and what laws are made and by whom. This slide shows how law is hierarchical. In general, international law is above all else, and all other kinds of laws are in a descending order. The slide also shows how law is made at different levels of government. Starting with international laws, known as treaties or agreements, we also have something called customary law, or laws that are so much part of human existence that we do not have to develop them. This law, international law, is created and made by governments. Often, an international organization, like the World Health Organization, organizes meetings at which governments debate new laws. The WHO has done this twice in its history. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and the International Health Regulations resulted. At the national level, constitutions outline the basic framework of government, the legal and political system, and defines your basic rights, such as your right to health. The image of the tree on this slide illustrates the idea with three branches of government. Do you know what your Constitution says about the right to health? There was a study done that determined that out of 186 country constitutions, 135 have some form of health provision. 95 have a specific right to health facilities, goods, and services, and 4 define a right to essential medicines. The constitutional outline is then filled in with laws and regulations. Law, legislation, acts, or statutes, all meaning the same thing, are made by legislators in a process that can be very long and formal. The law also gives every ministry the ability to issue regulations, which act like laws but are not so formal to establish, and changing them is easier when circumstances warrant. Regulations are like the small details, if you will allow me to call them that, and they give the ministry ease in its regulatory role. Often you find application forms and procedures in regulations. Finally, remember that courts and subnational bodies may also make laws. Let's take a look at Millennium Development Goals 1 and 3. In the picture in the upper left with 3 women, we look at MDG 1 to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Several dimensions of rule of law are shown by these Samburu women who are discussing land rights. First, these women need rights to the land on which they grow their food, and they need the right to participate in making the laws that affect them. Once the right is established, it needs to be enforced by the courts and the police. And by the way, these women are exercising the human right to associate in public. The other picture we see from last year, when goal number 3, promoting gender equality, played out in Saudi Arabia amid a controversy over a union between a 60-year-old man and an 8-year-old girl. The age of marriage became the topic of a new regulation. We hear similar stories about issues of gender equality all over the world. Another example comes from Afghanistan, where about 100 women were stoned while demonstrating against a marriage law they said restricted their rights as wives. I hope you agree that this is probably not a good example of the rule of law in practice. As public health professionals, we work towards the realization of the right to health. One way we do that is to consider the evidence in favor of or against a particular behavior or practice. The practice of female genital mutilation has no health benefit, as we all know, but is still suffered by an estimated 6,000 girls daily. In this slide, we look at a story from Ethiopia where the rule of law was included in a program along with other interventions for success in reducing female genital mutilation. Several steps were taken, as this slide shows. First, prominent religious leaders were organized, and through an education process, they arrived at consensus to criminalize and ban FGM. The criminal law was then changed to prohibit FGM, making it a crime that was punishable by sanctions. Now, in my rule of law work, I often hear that there is a law on the books, but somehow or another it's not enforced. So I would agree with you that maybe thinking that what we really need is a multidimensional approach to solving our problems. The law by itself is not enough in many cases, but without the law, the rest of the effort cannot make up for its absence. But what else is needed? I think we can summarize the pieces that the project used in this story, and those pieces are education, law change, understanding, education, of course, brings that, acceptance by community leaders and citizens, and adoption into behavior. In this IntraHealth project, the public, families, and community leaders were made aware of the change in the law, followed by public declarations and promises by well-known circumcisers to cease performing the practice. National and religious workshops were held to train religious leaders so they could advocate for the change that public health has known was needed, but that the law now required. In this slide, we see a story of an example of another principle of rule of law in action. This is a workshop to make law accessible. The precise task this group undertook was to make law clear and publicized. The laws on women's rights, such as for divorce and inheritance, were translated into the local languages. Then, to make sure they were known and understood, or in other words, publicized, tribal leaders read the laws on the radio at night in the local languages. This is a great example of a project that a local rule of law group can undertake. In this slide, we look at two examples of health system regulation and governance in action. We start with a pharmacists union, also known as a trade association. In many countries, these unions are separating from the government in a process known as privatization. They take up a function that the government used to exercise, but now an NGO or civil society organization is taking care of that function. In so doing, the union needs to be formed as a civil society organization or an NGO. Formation involves a charter stating a mission and a governance structure described often as requiring officers and directors. The rules and how and what this governance structure should look like is usually defined in the law. It also defines how the entity separates from the government. Unions for pharmacists and other health professionals are important for the enforcement of laws and for standard setting. In Albania, for example, the pharmacist union is now responsible for sanctioning pharmacists for bad practices, such as selling drugs that are out of date. Sanctions were done in the past by the Ministry of Health, but as the union has separated and has been given the legal authority to police itself and its members, it does so now. And it has the ability to suspend a license or to terminate a license. Now, if the behavior of the pharmacist gets really awful, the limits of the union to sanction its members are limited, and they must refer that pharmacist to the police for criminal activity. Turning to Nigeria, its Ministry of Health, like many others, are in a transition from a service provider to a regulator. Nigeria went through this when it realized an entire health insurance industry had grown up in the absence of any state regulation. After much negotiation, private companies were required by new insurance regulations to cover a basic package of primary health care. This was rule of law in action, as law was made openly with participation by civil society and enforced by a new regulatory authority, the Insurance Board.
Application of the rule of law, the budget process. Hello, I am Wendy Carson Smith, and I am here to present to you on the budget process as it relates to the rule of law. To protect the Treasury from being defrauded, let all money be issued openly in front of the whole city, and let copies of the accounts be deposited in wards. Aristotle. Budgets are a vital policy tool that governments use to promote their objectives of ensuring macroeconomic stability, to allocating resources and delivering services. Given the inherently technical nature of the budget process and their core political functions of raising and distributing public resources, they have often been characterized by a lack of transparency and scarce participation by external actors. We want to look at the need for the budget process. To build a healthy society by creating standards for health outcomes, improving population health outcomes, protecting the rights of all citizens to basic human health care resources, and identifying and tracking disease and epidemics. That is what we want to look at when we start to build a healthy society. Principles related to the rule of law and health budget monitoring. These principles are akin to the overall concepts that Michelle discussed earlier related to the rule of law. Let us look at them specifically as they address healthcare needs. In many instances, countries are not aware of a budget indexing process. The international budget process provides us with an index by which we can determine transparency and actual fairness in the budget process. The Open Budget Index process is headquartered in the District of Columbia And the index is intended to provide citizens, legislators, and civil society advocates with the comprehensive and practical information to gauge whether a government's commitment to budget transparency and accountability is apparent. Let us look at what the Open Index budget process reviews. The Open Index budget process looked at 85 countries in 2008, approximately 30 more than they did in 2006. They have a comprehensive methodology by which they compare what is given to the public with the budget and what is actually reviewed with the budget, as well as what the budget entails. Let us remember that as we go through the budget process, the legislature actually acts on the budget, the executive actually transmits the budget, and the administrative portions of the government actually implement the budget process. As part of that process, however, there are 7 key documents available during the 4 phases of the budget year. Stage 1, the executive formulates the budget. Stage 2, the legislature debates and approves the budget. Stage 3, the executive implements the budget and then transmits that budget down to the regulatory entities to actually take the money, use it for its purposes. Stage 4 is the end reporting and the independent auditing. The OBI scores the budget of various countries. In doing so, they use the score to rate whether or not a country is open, transparent, and has a budget process which fulfills the rule of law goals. This particular slide addresses that budget process. As one can clearly see, there are only 5 countries who actually scored in the top 100 as being open countries. If you need to actually review countries and you wish to get a graphic of which countries are the most open, please review this particular slide. It compares country by country using the key indicators whether or not the countries are open, transparent, and their budgets are available to the public. Only 5 of the 85 countries surveyed, France, New Zealand, South Africa, the United States, the United Kingdom, make extensive information publicly available as required by generally accepted good public financial management practices. As we look at these slides, we're not covering all of the information that is available through the OPI index. However, we are trying to touch on those major considerations that we feel you might wish to review. One of those considerations is that 25 countries provide scant or no budget information, including such low-income countries such as Cambodia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nicaragua, and several other countries. Ongoing issues, the budget infrastructure and staff are not supported. As long as the OPI index has been developed, there are certain issues that continue to surface. One of those issues is that the budget infrastructure and the staff are not supported. Central to any country's budget being available to the public is the ability of staff as well as others to provide and make public information associated with the budget. Many civil society organizations, parliamentarians, citizens, advocates, and journalists lack the basic skills to engage meaningfully with budget issues. Budget groups have considerable effort in raising the levels of budget literacy and awareness in order to promote deeper engagement. NGOs and budget groups work toward creation of strong and independent citizen groups. And then we have case studies which can provide you with more limited but significant evidence that budgets work and can work in helping to have a direct impact on improving budget systems and on proper budget allocations. If information is hard to obtain, those most in need disproportionately have a hard time getting it. As many of you know, information has a value. You need the information, especially about the economics of your country, to best serve your rule of law issues and projects. Bring like-minded people together to assist you with the development of a coalition. Coalitions associated with budget processes don't mean that one has to have a coalition of individuals working on the same projects, but instead you have a coalition of individuals who need and value and want information related to the budget. Investigate and publicize concerns. Use the media if you can. Sometimes you may be able to use national publications, but in other instances you may well wish to use the international media. Whatever option that you have, utilize it to your best for publicizing the issues associated with your budget. Use networks and communities. We all know someone who is in a position of authority within our community. Everyone knows someone else who might assist them related to the budget. Your friends, your neighbors, your family, your church members. Utilize those individuals to help you to get information about the budget as well as to work within the budget process. Remember elders and babies. While it might seem funny that they are referred to as part of your strategy related to the budget process, every society has a pressure point in which people will allow others to say things that we, frankly, might not be able to say. Typically, those who are held in positions of esteem and authority are children and elders. Have them tell your story. Use non-government organizations. Organizations like the Soros Foundation, the Ford Foundation, watchdog groups provide you with invaluable assistance in collecting information, educating your communities, and addressing the budget process. Use relationships with countries. Some countries hold other countries in high esteem. Some countries receive funding from other countries related to issues of concern and the rule of law. We wish to use those relationships to address issues associated with the budget process. Some foundations and NGOs involved in health monitoring include the following. These are not a listing of all of the organizations that might assist you, but this list provides you with direction and guidance associated with this particular issue. Please take the time to complete the evaluation. We appreciate and desire your input.
As Rule of Law champions, please convene local Rule of Law meetings. This online program is available for your use, and we hope you present it to health and legal professionals. If it is easier for you to do this with a CD-ROM, you can request one from Dr. Hatcher. The members of the legal community are judges, prosecutors, legislators, law enforcement officers such as police, customs, and health inspectors, the Minister of Justice and the staff from the ministry, the legal counsel to the Ministry of Health, law school deans, professors, and students, and finally, lawyers and the Bar Association. I assure you there will be interest when you contact these members and invite them to a screening of this training. As a result of these meetings, I think you will find the legal members of your new local Rule of Law team. After the meeting, where this webinar is presented, you may wish to discuss and identify what are the Rule of Law issues in relation to health and what solutions can you find. The first step, of course, and you all know this as public health professionals, is to assess what's going on. I have posted some tools, as I mentioned earlier, on my website that you can use. Following your assessment, many options are open depending on what you find. Here, however, are some suggestions that are fundamental to Rule of Law projects. First, given the goal of transparency and the difficulty of finding laws and regulations in the health sector, a first suggested step is to collect your local laws and connect citizens to them by projects that digitize them and organize them for easy access. Many countries and yours may be one of them, are working with the Global Legal Information Network at glin.gov. That website is explanatory, and you can find your country contacts there so that you can become part of that team and bring a health perspective to the content. Second, I would be remiss if I don't add the second step of mainstreaming law into your approaches to all of your health work, since law is a cross-cutting technical specialty. This can mean involving the General Counsel to the Ministry of Health, or the Dean of the Law School, or others to assist you in determining what local skills and international lawyers are available to you, and then bringing these skills to your work. It also means making a commitment to including legal guidance at the start of all projects and certainly at the operational level. The rule of law can be a standalone intervention or a system-wide project, or in reverse, health can become an intervention within other democracy and governance work that may be going on in your country. And finally, it should go without saying to an audience of public health professionals, but I'll say it anyway, building local legal capacity is a key step. When you conduct your local rule of law meetings with the legal community, you will learn whether local lawyers are tuned into public health. If not, then that is a capacity to build. I use a primer on public health for lawyers, and I'm happy to share it with you. Just ask. Local capacity also includes public health and building know-how on how the legal system can work for public health. Here you can invite your local law school to prepare courses for you in conjunction with your public health association. Finally, and this is not on the slide, as I trust as public health professionals you'll do this anyway, I hope you develop indicators by which to monitor and evaluate your rule of law progress, and thereafter disseminate the best practices that you have identified.
We hope that you have found this webinar to be informative and that you will become a champion of public health and the rule of law in your community. Consistent with the World Justice Project's Opportunity Fund's objective, you should look at the URL in our website and join our Facebook page so that you can be a real champion of the rule of law in a public health setting. Thank you.